Hi, and welcome to our webinar. I'm just going to wait a minute or two and let maybe additional people join, but everybody who's already on, thank you very much for joining, and we'll start in a few minutes. Well, we'll let the stragglers log on as they can. Everyone is in mute mode right now except for the panelists. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but if you'd like to submit a question at any point during the talk, you can type it in using the chat box that's part of the toolbar for GoToMeeting. If for some reason you don't see the question box or the chat box, just click the little orange arrow in the upper right of your screen and the chat box will show up. It sort of slides out from the right side of your screen. Today's topic is estimating the economic impact of transportation investments, and we're very excited to be able to offer this webinar with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. There's been tremendous interest in this topic, and this is actually the largest webinar that we've offered so far, so we are very excited to have everyone signed on. My name is Robbie Weber, although it does say that Bill Holloway is on here. I'm simply using his account. I'm a senior associate with the State Smart Transportation Initiative. And a little bit about SSTI for those who may not be familiar with us. We are located in Madison, Wisconsin, and we promote transportation practices for environmental sustainability, equitable economic development. Sorry, I'm just having a little trouble with my slides here. There we go. Government efficiency and transparency. We work with CEOs from 20 state DOTs to provide a community of practice, a place where they can talk to their peers and exchange ideas. We provide technical assistance to our partner states, and we operate as a resource to the wider transportation community. And I'm going to let Jen McGraw, who is the Climate Change Program Director at the Center for Neighborhood Technology, do most of this webinar. She's worked on this project with all the other presenters, and she will introduce the rest of the presenters. Jen is the Director for Center for Neighborhood Technology's Climate Change Program and head of CNT's San Francisco office. Recent transportation projects that Jen has led include the creation of a sustainable transportation plan for Oberlin, Ohio, and transit cooperative research project titled The Route to Carbon and Energy Savings, Transit Efficiency in 2030 and 2050. In her 13 years at CNT, Jen has worked to promote urban sustainability in the areas of climate change, transportation, energy, stormwater, air pollution, household cost of living, working with a diverse set of clients, including the Clinton Foundation, the Chicago Climate Action Plan, and the President's Climate Action Plan. Jen has a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a bachelor degree from UC Santa Cruz. And thank you very much, Jen, and I am going to turn it over to her. It might take just a moment to give her the control.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yep, you should have control now. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for taking time out of your Friday to attend this webinar. We're excited to have a conversation with you all today. We have an agenda that should take us just about an hour, and the first thing we're going to do is a few introductions, and then I'm going to provide a quick overview of the topic. Today we're talking about estimating the economic impact of transportation investments, and then I'm going to set some context for the current state of the practice. I'm going to be followed by my colleague James de Bettengort, who's going to talk about a decision support tool we've developed to help you analyze the key measures and tools that you may need to use in transportation economic analysis. My colleague Sarah Campbell is going to dig into kind of a how-to example, applying the scorecard to a real-world type situation. And then finally, Scott Richrath from the Colorado DOT is going to provide a state perspective on the work. And then we have time at the end for questions and answers. So please do type in your questions as they occur to you, and we'll keep track of them and try to give good answers at the end. I first want to introduce who's going to be talking to you today. Robbie introduced me. Thank you very much. The next person who's going to talk after me is James de Betancourt. He's a PhD planning and analysis consultant and an adjunct professor at the DePaul University Electronic Commerce and Human-Computer Interactions at the College of Computing and Digital Media. He has over 20 years of experience in strategic systems planning and automation systems in the travel and transportation industry, and additional experience with nonprofit technical support, e-business, and more. He has a PhD in urban and regional planning and civil engineering from Northwestern. Next, you'll be hearing from Sarah Campbell, who's the National Policy Director at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. She's a recognized leader in transportation policy and planning, and she has served as a policy advisor at the national level and advised a multitude of public and private clients as the president for Trans Management. We're lucky to say that Sarah joined CNT in 2011 and is leading our Washington, D.C. office and applying our economic development practice to regions throughout the U.S. Sarah has a master's in public administration in government policy and economics from the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. I'm going to interrupt to say somebody needs to mute their phone. There's a little bit of squeaking noise. And then finally, we're joined by Scott Richrath, who's the Performance and Policy Manager at the State of Colorado Department of Transportation. Scott has 20 years of analytical and operational experience, including supporting the direction and preparation of Colorado's $1 billion annual transportation budget. He has an MBA from the University of Denver and a bachelor's in finance from the University of Illinois, and he served as assistant dean to the University of Denver School of International Studies. And none of us would be here today without Bill Holloway, who was the principal SSTI staff person. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us on this webinar, but his contact information is at the end of the presentation, and you should feel free to get in touch with him. So this project that we're talking about today was a joint effort between SSTI and the Center for Neighborhood Technology, or CNT. And the Center for Neighborhood Technology, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit based in Chicago with small offices in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. We've been working on urban sustainability since the late 1970s. We think of ourselves as a think and do tank in which we not only research ideas, but we test them and then work to bring them to scale. We have 4 focus areas: transportation and community development, energy, water, and climate. We also have 2 affiliate organizations, IGO Car Sharing in Chicago and CNT Energy, which does policy planning and implementation of energy efficiency. So a quick overview of today's topic. As you all well know, state transportation planners are increasingly being called upon to look beyond typical transportation measures of system performance and examine the economic impacts of transportation investments. But the tools to do that are still getting up to speed. And though economic analysis is in demand because it helps ensure transportation projects support growth in the local economy, promote economic competitiveness in regions, and make the most efficient use of scarce public dollars, the tools and measures to do that are still in development. So today we're going to talk about the range of indicators used in transportation economic analysis and also discuss a scorecard we've developed to help you assess the models and data that are available to help you get your job done. The goals of this project were really to assess the current practices in the industry and promote the best practices, and then also look at the available models and data. This came out of an understanding that transportation professionals really need reliable measures and quality data to be able to do this kind of assessment. And we also looked for gaps that really need further research. As this field grows, we need to continue to help it evolve. The research that this discussion is based on involves an extensive transportation literature review, also looking at all the economic current practices, and then we also talked with 9 state transportation agencies. with the goal of creating a resource that really helps promote the best practices. So to get us all on the same page, we thought we would define what we're talking about when we talk about economic development. For the purposes of this project, we talk about economic development as meaning a transparent process or planned action that results in the retention and creation of sustainable jobs, wealth, and the improvement of quality of life. We also talk about economic analysis, in which we mean techniques that encompass but aren't limited to the analysis of more microeconomic aggregate economic measures relating to regional product, income, and employment. This may also include monetary, fiscal, financial, and other impacts that cannot be monetized but may be included in the analysis as relevant. You notice this is a broader definition than how economic analysis has been applied in many places today, which is part of why we need new tools and data to deal with it. We found that there were a lot of reasons why states are starting to look towards economic analysis as part of their planning. And in order to create useful resources, we set out to really understand what's driving that interest. The first thing we saw is that there's just an interest in greater return on investment after the recession and the slow recovery. We also found that the public is really putting pressure on states to get a high return on investment of tax dollars, and also that political leadership is motivated by current hard realities on the budget to make sure that dollars invested are really creating good long-term jobs. Overall, it comes down to competitiveness, and the demand for quality economic analysis is only going to increase going forward. This conversation doesn't start with a blank slate. Economic analysis has been around for quite a while, and many state DOTs have actually adopted economic goals. But what we found in the research is that many states have been slower to adopt related performance measures. So while there may be goals in place, they're not necessarily being measured. Depending on the agency, this is due to a lack of appropriate data, a concern with identifying the best measures to identify agency goals, and then a lack of staff familiarity with the requirements of economic analysis, or issues of funding and leadership. Where such analysis has become a priority, it still takes time to select the best few measures, acquire the data, report out results. And what we found is that many agencies have actually started this process with freight measures to reflect the concern with improving business conditions. But freight alone does not reflect the whole economic impact picture, as I think we'll show today. An important issue that we came across when we were working on this research is that transportation projects tracked a lot of economic gain, but this may actually just be economic redistribution from other areas. So a new transportation project can cause a company to move, and while that may have some efficiency and equity benefits, if it's just taking a job from one place and putting it in another, that's not a net economic benefit. So we wanted to particularly highlight this issue because it's one that trips up a lot of people. And we found that states have generally an awareness of this issue, but although many have put in some procedures to deal with addressing it, there's very little evidence of avoiding funding for projects that just lead to a redistribution of economic activity. This is even trickier when you look at the sub-state level to redistribution within regions, because the data in the economic models just aren't even at the right geographic scale to measure if jobs are just moving from one place to another. So in sum, this is an issue that always should be considered when doing economic evaluation, but it remains largely under-addressed. So what does this all look like in the real world? We wanted to show you this example from North Carolina. What you're seeing on your screen is actually their prioritization 2.0 process, which for the first time ever included benefit cost analysis and economic analysis in the ranking of projects. And you'll see for both statewide highway projects and regional projects, there's an economic competitiveness element to the scoring. And what they found is that including this actually did change the order in which projects get funded in their 10-year pipeline. And so one of the things to note here, though, is that the economic competitiveness is not called economic development because it doesn't include the sort of broader contingent development that can concur after a project is developed. And so it's sort of a narrower definition, but it is actually being used in practice there and having an impact. So if this is all valuable and in demand, why isn't it being used more? We found that there are plenty of barriers and costs that remain. We found that the majority of states still rely on consultants to get this kind of analysis done. They're relying on MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, and sister state agencies to meet their analysis needs. We didn't find that cost was cited as a factor in terms of a barrier to using proprietary models, but we did find a lot of concern over relying on black box models that staff did not understand, and even consumers didn't understand, the consumers of the data who have to make the decisions on it. And so part of our assessment is to talk about what goes into these models a little bit. Additionally, we found that a lot of the data that states need to do this analysis well just don't exist. And so ongoing data development is a key issue that we're going to highlight going forward from here. And then finally, we found that one of the problems is that only a small percentage of federally funded projects are evaluated after they're built. And so this leaves a real gap in the knowledge of how transportation projects are performing in the real world. And so there needs to be a lot more feedback loops happening of how things actually perform to be able to inform future development. So now I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague James de Betancourt for a discussion of a tool we developed to assess key measures and resources for this kind of economic analysis.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Jen. I'm hoping everybody can hear me well here. One of the things that we've learned from all our reviews, the interviews, the discussions, participation in project funding applications that we've done in the last year and prior to that is that there's some very obvious facts that have emerged from all this effort. Basically, what's come forward is that economic benefits need to be viewed comprehensively. And so we've been trying to put together a description of what everybody's been considering as the range, the extent of economic benefits that we are encountering in the different types of projects, whether it's a Tiger project, whether it's a state planning activity, or rail, transit, or highway type projects. Clearly, the idea is that economic benefits should be viewed comprehensively rather than just considering the simple user benefits or direct user benefits, time savings, cost savings. If we don't extend that view, we'll be ignoring a number of the potential benefits that states are interested in and the public is interested in receiving from the investments in transportation infrastructure and trying to get the best return on their tax dollars. What we're really looking for in a lot of cases are localized, realistic benefit measures. And again, we're trying to say that the benefit measures that we've been looking for need to be grounded in the kind of standard performance measures. We have to build into them the more traditional consumer-focused benefits that we see in a lot of the benefit cost-effectiveness analysis. A lot of effort or a lot of discussion has occurred in the last few years or last decade, if you will, for building in the regional economic development enhancements, employment, induced development, value capture, and we've been extending many of these concepts, or the funding applications have asked to extend these to include things like livability, environmental impacts, health benefits, better land and resource use, things of that nature. And so what we've really put together is basically one way. If this is the range of benefits that we expect to see going forward that are being requested in the different types of multiple criteria applications that are being put forward for competitive grants, part of the issue for state agencies is going to be making sure that they've got tools or they have ways to address these multiple types of benefits that everybody's saying, how does my project stack up against? Again, system performance is one of the base ones. We're really saying that you do have to pay attention to state of good repair. You need to make sure that the infrastructure actually exists and is connected, and that it can be paid for. Asphalt and concrete aren't free, so we really have to pay attention to that. We do need to address the issues of travel time savings, travel cost savings, safety, accessibility. It's kind of standard things that come out of most of the travel modeling tools that people have been using. Added on to that, we do need to pay attention to the regional economic development issues. They're being requested in many of these application frameworks. What's the impact on short-term employment, the construction employment? What's the long-term employment issues? How does this affect future induced development? How do we capture some of this value to help finance these projects and others? And then finally, as I said before, we found a whole new category of livability impacts that are continually trying to be addressed. New research has been coming out. Some of the NCHRP reports have come out recently, or TCRP reports regarding how to integrate environmental measures into transportation planning. So again, the key idea that we've seen here is that everybody wants us to look at economic benefits very comprehensively. The benefits should be realistic, audible, based in research and results rather than just guesstimates. We want to focus on achievement and implementation as part of the message, and no one likes black boxes anymore, if they ever did. But that's one of the things that we have to also get around and understand, that that we have to back up contentions of benefits with realistic understandings of the commitments necessary, the process to get those benefits, and they have to be based in understanding and expertise. Can we go into the next slide now, please? One of the ways that we've tried to make this hierarchy or this understanding of benefits useful is by creating what we call a scorecard, where we are trying to organize these types of benefits, organize them as part of a process or a ways that we can understand the types of activities, steps, considerations that are involved if a statewide agency wants to include this broader composite concept of economic benefits. And what we've been trying to do as well is say, of the various types of tools that are available to you, simple data tools, some of the standard modeling tools, some of the more advanced modeling tools or economic analysis tools, how do they stack up in giving us information that we can use to measure local impacts, that we can measure system performance, that we can measure classic benefit cost, that we can go through and come up with an impact in an economic impact assessment, or even assess livability. And so we're not trying to evaluate each and every tool in the scorecard in terms of which is the single best one or which is of all the tools available, but we've tried to do a representative sample of the types of tools, some of that people should be current with or should understand or might be considered in the process of trying to come up with these analyses. One of the other things that this scorecard did when it looks at range of tools compared to the types of benefits we're trying to measure is that there's certain areas where there's white space in the scorecard, where we don't have good tools that can answer all of the questions at the level of detail that we're possibly interested in having them answered. Anybody who's tried to respond to a Tiger funding, competitive funding request, one of those Tiger requests, again, it's a very broad set of criteria that are being asked about in the application, but there aren't necessarily good tools or techniques always available to come up with detailed answers. And so that's one of the things that we've been trying to do with the scorecard. Look at the range of benefits, look at examples of tools that people might consider in trying to help answer their questions. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Each one of the cells on the scorecard, what we're trying to do is look at for that specific economic impact measure that we're considering, whether it's related to a standard employment measure or whether it's related to travel time savings, travel cost savings, things like that. We're trying to assess is the tool or data source that we're considering, is it a primary tool, again, that can be used to measure that type of impact? If so, we've coded that as just we're using a simple 0, 1, 2 type scaling or blank 1, 2 scaling. The better tools we give a rating of 2 to in terms of saying that they can be used to measure the type of impact or help provide the information. If they don't exactly answer the question, or if they've only partially answered the question or provide some of the information, we've given them a rating of 1. Other than that, we've left the cells blank for where a particular tool may not be able to answer the question at all. Again, the white space. Some areas where if you want to include those types of impacts in your responses to funding requests, things like that, you may have to come up with your own way to address those. It may not be a tool-based approach. It may be a descriptive approach. Could we go on to the next slide, please? Okay. Across the top, as I've said before, we have, well, I'll go back into that. I'm getting ahead of myself here. The vertical axis on our scorecard really looks at a number of decision support tools or decision support information that you probably have encountered in a number of different areas. We have some primary data tools, basically things like household financial information, information that you might get out of business directories, geographic data, data to describe the networks. Again, there are primary data sources that we use throughout any transportation planning effort that, again, they help answer some very specific questions. We also have a variety of purpose-focused restructures of the primary data or organized presentations, the census transportation planning product data sets. Those types of information represent specific restructurings of data that's generally available but focused on answering specific transportation-related questions. Or we have one of the other tools that the Center for Neighborhood Technology has been working on is the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index. Again, it's a purpose-focused analysis of presentation of data related to housing affordability, transportation affordability. There's transit-oriented databases. There's specific state-level models that are based upon aggregations and special formulations of data like the Washington State GPS data. We also have traffic engineering performance-based tools in there, standard highway capacity manual-based tools on through to intelligent transportation systems and some of the related tools that would help simulate what's going on with specific impacts associated with hot lanes, tolling, any of those other things. We have our travel demand models, aggregate rail ridership forecasting model, and they recently came up with a new version of that that isn't included in here, but we've got a 4-step model, activity-based travel demand models, integrated transportation and land use models, and we've been trying to say, okay, put together where do we get the benefits for these? Regional economic models, the standard input-output models, IMPLAN, REMI, as well as the Tretis framework that integrates an input-output model into the overall cost effectiveness, cost benefit calculations as well. And then there's a final area that we've been looking at, which is community of practice, where again, what we've been trying to see is AASHTO, AMPO have been working for a long time on creating performance measures, trying to reflect what's actually occurring in the field, in states, relating to things. That has a lot of value, and you can get useful information, useful results from that. You can look at case-based reasoning or case-based analysis, the sharp T-pick thing. We've got performance monitoring techniques, HPMS. We even have analytical expert panel forecasting that's been used in a number of cases. So these are the types of data and tools that we're saying people have used these at various stages in the analysis, and how can they help us answer questions. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Again, the horizontal axis of this scorecard is simply looking at the types of impact measures. Again, one of the points we understand is that all our measures, all our impacts are localized. We have to pay attention to the geography of the impacts, whether it's a corridor, whether it's a station area, whether it's the region around a new interchange, or whether it's a multi-state transportation service district, something like that. Again, we need to be able to understand if we're getting the information at the right geographic level. We want to know how we can get system performance information, pavement condition. Does it give us that? Are there ways to measure the network utility, operational and financial impacts? We've got a series of columns relating to benefit cost and cost effectiveness measures that you would normally see, or the measures that you would normally see in those types of discussions. Travel time savings, travel cost savings. Do they give us information on safety, reduction in accidents, injuries, things of that nature? We've also have a set of columns that reflect regional economic development, again, ranging from fiscal impact through various types of employment measures, as well as value capture, value creation, even including property value impacts. And then we go into the series of, do these tools give us information about environmental benefits, or how we're using land and resources? Are there health benefits, walkability, pedestrian friendliness? A lot of these things are very important measures that are talked about in these multiple criteria frameworks. And I think I've probably spent more than enough time walking through the structure, and I think what we really need to do now is talk about how do you apply this type of scorecard approach. And I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Campbell to start that discussion.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. I want to give you all a couple more clues about the way in which we put the scorecard together. First, it's important to know when you use it that since we were not able to put everything that one would want into a single matrix, we have a couple of layers, and the most important one for my money is underneath each example you will find a link to either a reference or a resource that will provide you information on the example. And of course, as Jim said, we could have added a lot of other examples, but we chose to do those that we thought were pretty key to the kinds of questions that you might come up with. I will take you through an example this afternoon to show how you might use the scorecard. Whoops. And the other resources of the website. Those resources include
Sarah, I just wanted to let you know people are telling me that they can't hear you, so if you can bring the microphone a little closer.
How's that?
Just speak up as much as you can, because I know you're really soft. So.
Thank you. Okay, let's start over, because it's very important that you know that underneath the examples, is that working?
Better.
Can you hear me? Okay. Underneath the examples, you will have a link to a resource or a website that will provide you with information about that example. We were not able to provide all of the examples that one might want, but we think the ones we've given you are representative of many of the questions that you might have that you might need to research. The scorecard is an information tool to support your decision making, the planning, and what we try to do is again, provide the most primary examples to go within each of the categories on the vertical axis. This afternoon, I want to highlight how you might use it and the other resources, the report and the annotated bibliography in particular, to gather information on whether economic activity anticipated from a transportation investment is new or it has just shifted from one place to another. Now, it's also true, we know that sometimes when development shifts, you get a lot of benefits that are important. You get productivity benefits, for example, for particular firms or enterprises. But often you might just be moving it around, so it's important to consider the net economic benefit. So if you were using this tool to try to find more information about that topic, let's use the example of the on the vertical axis, the regional economic activity category and the community of practice. The first step would be to look at those two categories and to see how the impact is measured, as Jim described, in terms of blank 1 or 2 that would guide you to what you might want to spend your time on. And then you see that in this case, you might want to look more at the REMI Policy Insight and the Treatise. Those are not the only ones, but they're the ones in our example today. And you also would look at the community of practice. One of the things that came out of the literature review is that there is a lot of support for not just looking at a model to answer this question of what would be the category of induced impacts, but to combine your methods. In the example of the community of practice, the 2 is in the combined analytical and expert panel forecasting. There's a link underneath that example to a study by Reed Ewing and Richard Kuzmiak showing the need to use several techniques. You need to account for the bias or the overestimation of induced demand in many models that don't have land use regulations or knowledge of specific panel techniques. Oops, somebody needs to quiet a bit. And you might use an expert panel technique in combination with that model because they found in this research that experts who have the regulatory and land use history and knowledge may in fact undercount the potential for induced development due to perhaps too much knowledge about local condition and not enough about network effects. You could also look at the annotated bibliography on the website, which would lead you to several other references on this topic, including an extensive guidebook produced for TRB, which AASHTO requested in 2007, produced by Yuri Avens and others at PD. I want to take a moment to underscore something that has been mentioned previously, but it's an important finding from our point of view, which is this community of practice category, which we included because the research indicates that for some of these issues, such as the induced development, shifts in development, collaboration is needed across the transportation profession and uplands to really advance the state of the practice. Generally, we have fallen short on the transport side of things in doing a systematic evaluation of the billions of dollars of projects that are developed and implemented every year. This is particularly true in terms of the economic development benefits, and it really will take a lot of collaboration of many people to build up our understanding of what is the actual result of the projects that we have on the ground. I think the Sharp 2 TPICS is a good start, but the body of reference projects is really small, and so I think we all need to try to build that body of knowledge. It's part of the reason why we have included in the on the website an annotated bibliography to hone in on about 38 references that we think give you some very specific knowledge. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, the state of the practice is advancing so rapidly. I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been getting a couple of really good reports each of the last several months, and not all of those are yet on the bibliographies, the annotated bibliographies. So we have a commitment to keep that up over time and update it every couple of months. And we would welcome knowing what you would suggest should be included, and also your own annotations. The scorecard, the next slide shows the purpose-focused data, which Jim explained and showed that we have some specific examples of data that are particularly useful to answer some of these questions and address the economic development issue.
Sarah, you're getting quiet again. You're going to have to speak up.
Okay, thank you.
As much as you can.
One of the tools, again, is this purpose-focused category. And I want to remind you that underneath, again, each of the examples, there is a link to relevant information on those examples. Jim explained that we have some general data provisions, but we also have this purpose-focused. For example, the American Community Survey is a more general one, but it does provide now the main source of our commuting data. Our examples also include some very specifically focused data sets and links to them when you click on the example. In the last three cases are the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, the TOD database, and a special report that we found in our research where Washington State is looking very closely at truck freight and the use of GPS data for exploring a number of key freight measures. The matrices of the measures for truck freight that are considered in this analysis, this very extensive analysis that Washington State is doing, are also included as an appendix to the report on the website. Next slide. The report includes a final chapter that looks at some of the key areas that we wanted to draw your attention to that require and represent some recent and emerging issues and practices. You've heard a little bit about the importance of the geographic unit of analysis. It's very important, for example, if you are looking at a project or system, perhaps a new streetcar system in a particular city, that you are looking for the benefits and the impacts at the right level. If everything is at the county or the state level, you're going to miss a great deal of the activity that would occur. Obviously, this is less important in a less dense or rural area, but for much of the work that we all do in urban areas, we want to stress the importance of the geographic unit of analysis. The role of physical impacts, such as property values, sales tax generation, the kind of physical impacts of local and state government. Also, and this is a plug for one of C&T's products, of course, household affordability, which is a useful measure for cost of living. The positive and negative impacts of induced development from investment we've talked about. The impact of agglomerative benefits and how and when they occur, which is very important as we look at the different types of projects that might be considered as options to meet our various transportation needs. And then the continued importance, as we see it, of the community of practice and collaboration and evaluation. The H+T index is an example of a small-scale geographic unit of analysis where the data is provided for housing and transportation. And also, if you look at the map on the left side, employment accessibility in very small units so that you can see the effect of even relatively small scale projects. This index includes a number of other important measures, including transit connectivity at even the bus stop level. So before I turn it over to Scott, who I hope is online, I'm not showing that actually, not seeing him actually lit up there, but I'd like to just make the point that combining, managing, and comparing the results of the different impact estimation techniques is really becoming a hallmark of some of the newer tool sets for transportation planners. And yet, when looking at the full comprehensive benefits and costs of transportation investments, we don't see usually a single tool or model that is available to address all of the impacts. And it might not be realistic given the variety of conditions for projects and the individual goals of states. And now I'd like to turn it over to Scott Rickrath of Colorado DOT.
Are you on there, Scott?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I am on. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was an excellent encapsulation of where we're at on the scorecard. I just want to provide a little bit of perhaps background on where Colorado was before this project came along and where we think we'll be after this project as a result of having some of the tools that CNT and SSTI have provided. If we were to go all the way back to Tiger 1, and I'm sure a lot of state DOTs were in somewhat similar situations in that we weren't as advanced as North Carolina. We didn't necessarily have a uniform scoring system for economic competitiveness or for benefit cost ratios. When we did our Tiger 1 grant applications, it wasn't centralized or standardized. We had applications being done by consultants. We had applications being done by staff at headquarters in Denver. We had applications being done by staff within the regions. And when we looked at the different applications that we had, our benefit cost analyses were kind of across the board. And it's not that one was more accurate than another or that one had used better references than another, but we had attacked them in different ways. And as a result, just within our state alone, we had delivered projects with varying benefit cost ratios anywhere from 3.5 to 1 to almost 200 to 1. And it caused us to say, hey, perhaps we could provide, if not a formula or if not a one-stop shop reference guide, at least a little bit of guidance. We did that in Tiger 2. We provided a little bit of guidance. We used some of the references that we've seen here in the scorecard as best practices for measuring economic competitiveness within Colorado for individual projects. But we realized that that didn't necessarily get us everything we were looking for. We still needed something in order for an application for an individual project or for a program to feel a little bit more confident in the numbers that they were using and that they were being updated regularly. They were regionalized when they needed to be regionalized. They were national if they were allowed to be national. So if you move to the next slide, you'll see where we're at today, and we're going to leverage the work here that's been accomplished by CNT and by SSTI to develop for ourselves what we're hoping is not a black box, although it will be to users perhaps that don't follow us through the entire process, but what we believe will be a more transparent way of assessing and evaluating projects before and after completion and of determining what programs rise in importance when we look at economic development as a greater factor than we do today. Typically, our programs are evaluated for many of the other criteria that we discussed, condition and mobility, but we haven't necessarily done a good job of measuring the economic benefit of individual projects. As Jen pointed out earlier, freight for us was the one area where we felt we had put a lot of emphasis on economic development, but we hadn't necessarily taken that to the household level, to the neighborhood level, to the community level. So if you turn to my final slide, There are a few important points that we got out of Tiger 2 that have carried us through and in fact will build into this toolkit now moving forward. And one big element to us is the cannibalization piece that you see on bullet number 4, and it's the redistribution that we spoke of. We found that when we very much localized the analysis of economic development, we weren't accounting for whether or not we were moving economic activity simply from one part of the state to the other, or we weren't accounting for it properly enough. We also might not have been accounting properly for induced demand that we were actually triggering as a result of the project. So the toolkit will give us the ability not only to field a more robust, more comprehensive set of benefit cost tools in our application for competitive grants, but it'll also give us the ability to go back after the fact and take a look at projects and see the before and after with the performance metrics that we've been provided. What was the actual economic impact to that neighborhood, to that region of that particular project? So that's really all I had to say from the Colorado side.
Well, thank you. That actually finishes up our presenters. And I want to remind anybody, if they have questions, please type them into the question box on the side. If you don't see it, there should be a little orange arrow in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and you can type in your questions. Here is the information if you'd like to see more about this project. Bill Holloway, who worked directly with CNT from our end, and Scott and Sarah's contact information for Colorado and for CNT on their end. And I do have some questions that have been submitted, so I'm going to see if I can get those. Let's see. Okay. I'm trying to get this these questions. First question we actually had was, how does the Colorado perspective match with the findings of the assessment that created the scorecard?
Okay. Jen, this is Jim de Betancourt. I'll try and answer that if I can. I think that Colorado situation is a good example of the type of work, the type of issues that all the different states and MPOs will need to continually address. I think that what they saw starting with Tiger and what they're trying to do in terms of internal procedures is that the idea is everybody's still looking for the composite benefits, that model of benefits that range from system performance all the way through to livability is continuing to be used. You're going to face this multiple criteria evaluation framework, and what Colorado's done is gone through the process of looking at the different tools that are available and say, okay, what can we use, what's specific to our instance, how can we get the answers and standardize how we respond to these competitive funding requests, what specific techniques, tools do we need to have training and expertise in. And again, that scorecard, and really in a sense, is developed from watching what some of these states have done, is that it gives you at least an understanding of the range of tools, their usefulness. Some examples, we've got all the links to the underlying documentation for the tools, so you can create your own understanding of them. And again, I think it's a great example of what everybody's going to have to keep doing, is continually evaluate what's out there in terms of the tool sets, how do we want to incorporate that best practices into the individual state planning processes. So.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try and answer two questions here at the same time. We will have a recording of this webinar up on the SSTI website probably by the end of the day, but definitely if we can't get it to you by the end of the day, it'll be up there over the weekend. So you will be able to see all of this again or pass it on to someone else. Also, the scorecard, I know, is a little bit hard to read, but it is also up on the SSTI website so that you can take a look at that. Now we do have a question here. These models must be dependent on forecasting future trends in mobility. How do these models forecast future travel demand?
Tim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Again, in part the models and how they handle future travel demand varies depending upon which specific model you're looking at. Some of them are simply dependent upon what other economic projections are set up for a state or a region. Some of them are, if they're the integrated models, will try and internally forecast future travel. I think if you go through the different modeling literature, some of the sites and some of the resources that we have there, you're running into a range of estimates, a range of procedures for coming up with the demand estimates, and techniques really need to be reflective of the situation, but they're usually grounded in extensions of historical performance, expectations as to where your economy is going. And the other thing is in a number of cases, you're not working with just a single set of forecasts. You will come up with high, medium, low, good economy, bad economy type forecasts in the aggregate that will inform what are going to be the specific numbers that you may use for one or the other type of forecast. So hope that answers part of the question.
Yeah, I think I missed the second half of the question here, and which was, do they any more forecast? Do they any more than forecast linear growth from the past when recent data trends suggest that traffic demand is slowing and reversing in many areas since the 2000s? So, you know, in other words, how do we deal with the question of changes in travel demands in the last, 10 years? Or the last 5 years, perhaps?
In the last 5 years, 10 years, changes in or increases in non-proportional increases in different areas. I think that's still an area where there's a substantial amount of discussion about the different techniques and how you would start addressing those. I think that some areas, at least internationally, they've even started addressing the issue of how do you basically mothball certain facilities if you no longer have the demand for it. So I think part of the issue in using any of these forecasts is coming up with a reasonable set of assumptions of where is the traffic going. If you are having an aging population that isn't going to be traveling by car as much, that's going to affect it. So you're going to need to start, again, reflect some of the understandings you have about the demographics, the land use. And again, what people will be examining when they receive these funding requests that have this information is, have you done a consistent job of explaining what's happening with these forecasts? There's any number of ways that you could quantify them, but I think part of the understanding that we've gotten here is that the numbers may not be all of the story. You can make mathematical models, you can make economic models, do just about anything you want to, but part of the acceptance of the results really requires the expertise going in to make sure that you've got reasonable forecasts, that you have reasonable utilizations of the models, whether you're talking travel demand, whether you're talking changes in economic sectors, whether you're talking changes in land use.
Very good. Well, I don't see any further questions unless someone would like to type in any more. And yes?
This is Sarah. I just want to respond to something that Scott snuck into his presentation, and I want a round of applause that his new toolkit will not only predict but also evaluate after the fact. So I think that's terrific.
Great. Let me just check. I think there's a question about whether these models have been established, whether the validity has been established in the real world.
I think Jim can answer that, but I think that is one of the areas that came into question as we looked at the literature and the review. I think they're getting better. They're starting to use smaller scale data and a bunch of other improvements, but it is a question in my mind.
Okay. Well, very good. We are just exactly at the 1 hour point. I do want to remind everyone on the call, thank you very much for participating, both people who tuned in and our panelists. This will be up on our website, and also all of the information is up on the SSTI website, the scorecard and the annotated bibliography and things like that. We will have our next webinar on July 17th at noon Central, 1 o'clock Eastern, and the topic is land use and traffic congestion, the results of research in Arizona. There's a registration link on our website, and thank you everyone for a great webinar.